morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. So much to do today. Our buddy Davin Bellamy, fresh off some good news for him last week, back with us here today. We'll talk about his kind of furthering his football career, how that's going to be taking shape, and his thoughts on the Georgia Bulldogs, too. We'll also hear from Mike Griffith on everything that's been going on with Georgia spring practice as of late. Speaking of that, yesterday, pretty revealing comments from Kirby Smart on a couple points of emphasis for these Dogs thus far this spring. We'll address how we think all of that's going. And off the top here today, little bit of, manufactured drama, if you want to call it that, as it relates to Georgia and the quarterback position. This is probably unavoidable because, let's face it, sometimes the media is going to do what it's going to do. But we'll kick it off with that. We'll share a couple of thoughts, and we'll have a good time with it all. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of the things I'm very proud of is we have people of like all ages that watch or listen to our show. There are people who are far older than me because I'm kind of right in the middle from an age standpoint. There are people who are far older than me. They may remember the Herschel Walker era and Georgia in the Sugar Bowl beating Notre Dame and winning the national championship for Vince Dooley. They have great memories of that. On the other hand, there are people who watch and listen to our show who are far younger than me. They barely even remember the Mark Richt era. So we've got like all ages represented, all generations represented, and I'm really proud of that because obviously you want to be a Big Ten, kind of have room for everybody, and we've done our best to make sure we do that. For a couple of seconds here, I want to address the people, though, who are like almost exactly my same age because I'm guessing many of you have a very similar kind of like life that I do from the standpoint that, you know, I'm really into my work, I'm really into my family, and I just spend a lot of time like leave work, you go take care of your kids, you're running around, you're taking them to all their various sports and activities, things like that. And sometimes you might find that doesn't leave a ton of room for other things. For instance, and like I said, if you're about my same age, you probably maybe relate to this a little bit. One of the things that's not really present in my life all that much now that I kind of miss, I like watching TV. And I don't get to watch a ton of TV right now, and I miss it. One of these days, I hope to be able to sit down and watch a little more TV. I just like kind of, kicking back, relaxing. Obviously, still watch sports, of course. I'm talking about like the TV dramas. You know, for instance, my favorite kind of like, I guess, producer of like the TV dramas, I used to love, going back years ago, the Sunday night HBO shows. Now, to give you an idea of, you know, how much things have changed, it's not even called HBO anymore. I guess it's called Max now, and you watch it on streaming. But for whatever reason, more so than like Netflix or Amazon Prime, even more so than like Paramount Plus, I've just always sort of liked the HBO style of dramas. I kind of miss not having much to do and being able to watch all the Sunday night shows throughout the years and just kind of kick back and relax. I don't kick back and relax very much. Many of you probably feel like you are the same way. But when I think back on my moment, sort of watching like HBO, now called Max, the sort of Sunday night dramas that have been in our lives, and many of you have watched these shows. Have you ever noticed this? Maybe you have. That a lot of these shows are pretty similar from a plot line standpoint. Let me give you a couple of for instances. And you may not know these shows, and that's okay. Many of you probably will. Think about like Game of Thrones for a minute. Do you know that show, Game of Thrones, very big a few years ago? The main plot line throughout all the years was who gets to be king. That's like the main point of the show, or queen. Like who gets to sit on the throne. Like that's the whole point of the show. And, you know, I used to love The Sopranos. Going back years ago, The Sopranos, probably one of my all-time favorite shows. I used to watch every Sunday night when they come on. Get right there, you know, going to watch The Sopranos. Similar to Game of Thrones, sort of a multi-year story arc for The Sopranos is who gets to be the mob boss? Like, who gets to be the guy in charge? Game of Thrones, who's the king? Sopranos, who's the mob boss? Then years later, you know, Succession, y'all watch that? I thought that was a really fun show. Once again, who gets to be the CEO? Like, for whatever reason, and I don't really necessarily understand this, but a lot of the HBO shows, very different creators, very different actors, very different whatever, but a lot of the HBO shows, the themes are very similar. It's like, who gets to have the really cool job, and what do they have to do to get the really cool job? And what we see is, whether it be like kings in the medieval time or mob bosses in the underworld or CEOs in the corporate world, there is a little bit of a natural soap opera around what is sometimes called palace intrigue, the maneuverings that take place for someone to have a cool job, whether it be mob boss, king, CEO, whatever else. There's just always going to be some natural intrigue about who gets to have what is perceived to be a very cool job. Now, at this point in time, you're probably asking a question. What does any of this have to do with Georgia football? That is a fair question. What I'm here to tell you is much the same way back in the old ancient days, people wanted to know who the king was going to be. And in the criminal underworld, they want to know who the mob boss is going to be. And in the corporate world, they want to know who the CEO is going to be. No matter how hard Georgia may try to push against it or fight against it, there is always going to be a natural curiosity about the Georgia quarterback. And there's always going to be kind of an inherent soap opera to that, no matter how hard the very drama-averse head coach Kirby Smart or the quarterback that he selects might be. There's just a certain degree of like drama around the Georgia quarterback position that can never be avoided, no matter how hard you try. Let me give you the latest example of what I'm talking about. Yesterday, interesting in Athens, got a chance to hear from Georgia Coach Kirby Smart, once again giving us more details on how things are going for Georgia spring practice. More on some of that in a moment on a completely different topic. But starting for now on the quarterback position, one of the things we've been led to believe is, after 6 quarters of postseason play a year ago, Gunner Stockton now ready to take the helm as the starting quarterback for the full season here for Georgia. And one of the things that Kirby Smart has always sort of described Gunner as is a very reliable, dependable guy, a guy who teammates get along with, people seem to genuinely like. To go back to what I was saying a moment ago, the least soap opera-like quarterback you're ever going to have, you know, there was a lot made of him prior to the Sugar Bowl of driving the old pickup truck. That Gunner Stockton, in many ways, just sort of feels like the kind of guy that would drive an old pickup truck. There's not going to be much drama. There's not going to be much, flashiness about him. And that kind of salt-of-the-earth personality and the fact that he's now been at Georgia, patiently waiting, learning while he's waiting, that's one of the things that makes seemingly Gunner Stockton the heir apparent as Georgia's starting quarterback. And yesterday, Kirby Smart described some of those characteristics and how that is kind of working in Gunner's favor here right now. This is some of what Kirby Smart had to say.
It helps. I mean, he understands what we're trying to do. He's been through it. I mean, I think about it. We got all Gunners at every position. You know, they understand the volume of reps, what we're trying to do. He knows the offense inside and out. And then I get frustrated and impatient when other guys don't know it like him, and you have to kind of slow yourself down and say, wait a second, this guy's going 3. How long is this day before from the same right they just for these other guys that they're in their second, their first. I mean, it's a youthful team, and it shows itself in a lot of ways.
So once again, when you hear Kirby describe Gunner that way, there's sort of I think an unspoken subtext to all that, which is he's been around. Not only does he know what we need from him and what this offense requires, the unspoken subtext to all of that is we also know Gunner Stockton too. We're not going to be surprised to see him roll in one day, driving some super flashy car that seems to send a message, whether intended or not. He's not going to show up covered head to toe in tattoos, and there's nothing wrong with tattoos. But I'm just saying, like, the sort of behavior that might, take place where somebody sort of demonstrates themselves to be a little bit flashy. Gunner Stockton's not going to be a flashy guy, and he's not going to necessarily embrace the sort of natural drama that comes with the quarterback position. And many of us assume, and perhaps not incorrectly so, that one of the things that makes Gunner attractive to Kirby, in addition to all the stuff that you just said there, is the fact that he's sort of a known commodity. He's sort of salt of the earth, And he's the sort of guy that sort of dials down the drama that seems to naturally exist with the Georgia quarterback position. In fact, if you go to our DawgNation YouTube page, we got about 8 minutes with Gunner yesterday, and you want to talk about, like, very mild-mannered, kind of soft-spoken, I would say, in this press conference, more so than some of the stuff we heard leading in the Sugar Bowl, like just the least controversial, the least bombastic. You know, we had a chance to hear from him yesterday, facing all the questions that you would imagine the potential Georgia starting quarterback would be asked. And, I mean, almost to the point of, like, not even answering the questions. Gunner's just saying very little. He's going to get in and get out of his time, and there's not going to be any drama. There's not going to be any controversy. There's not going to be any of that. But here's where we go back to what we were talking about off the top of the show. That no matter how hard you work to make the Georgia quarterback position non-controversial and non-soap opera-like, no matter how you try to, like, reduce the drama and eliminate the drama, y'all, this is quarterback at the University of Georgia, a program with millions of very passionate fans. Because of that, there's just always going to be an unavoidable, we'll call it curiosity, but perhaps it's a word that's even maybe more intense than that, going to always be sort of an unavoidable curiosity around these sorts of things. And as you've heard me say before, the appetite for Georgia football information is always very, very high. The availability of information not always quite as high. And in the gap between the appetite and the availability, there's always going to be some room for some crazy stuff to happen. Even after yesterday, in one of the most, like, benign, uneventful press conference of all time, somehow we still ended up with a salacious headline on this press conference. You have to hear it for yourself. Let me show you this from our friends at On3. Headline: Gunner Stockton takes sly parting shot at Carson Beck when asked about former Georgia quarterback transfer. Not only do our friends at On3 write this story, we also see from their website that it's a trending story. It's not apparently quite as hot as Xavier hiring Richard Pitino, but it's among the more trending stories apparently on their website, because Gunner Stockton, who I don't think has ever taken a shot at anybody, somehow is taking a parting shot at Carson Beck. In the body of the story from our friends at On3, here's what we read. The quarterback was asked Tuesday if Carson Beck had offered him any idea that he was transferring to Miami ahead of time. Stockton simply smiled and shrugged. He was busy. So that was the line from Gunner Stockton, which in a roundabout way is kind of funny. I'm not going to dispute that. But as I said, it just goes to show you, like a lot of other, like, really kind of sexy, interesting jobs, there's always going to be a little soap opera on the Georgia quarterback spot, no matter how hard a coach Kirby Smart or the particular quarterback in a given year sort of fights against that. Now, for additional context here, and because we like to be fair and balanced, I do want to let you hear the quote that turns into the trending headline with our friends at On3. My guess is, in actually hearing this, it's not going to sound quite as salacious as perhaps something you might have read on social media or in print. Here is an exchange, Gunner Stockton with a reporter, about the departure of Carson Beck and kind of how all of that played out. This is from yesterday.
When did you find out that Carson Beck was transferring instead of going to the NFL? And if Mike Vogel let you show your favorite route, what would it be?
I found out, did you say when Carson went where?
Transfer to Miami.
Like everybody, I saw it on the stuff. So
Did he say ahead of time?
No, he is busy. No, I know he's been busy right now, just spring ball and everything, but I hope he's doing good.
So there you go. At the end, he says, listen, I hope he's doing good. So the idea that Gunner Stockton took a shot at Carson Beck, the fact that he concludes that statement by saying, listen, I hope he's doing well. I think that kind of removes all of that, even if the line about he's been busy was funny. I mean, it was funny enough that Gunner even kind of gave a laugh at it too. So it just goes to show you that Gunner Stockton is one of the least, controversial figures you're ever going to see. But there is an inherent drama that exists in the Georgia quarterback position, whether it's him, Carson Beck, Stetson Bennett, JT Daniels, Jake Fromm, Justin Fields. I mean, just whoever occupies the spot, there's going to be an inherent drama just baked into the cake that is the Georgia quarterback position. And you could turn this into, well, that just goes to show you how bad the media is, but that's not the point of all this. The point is you might as well just acknowledge it, and you might as well just own the fact that this year, like any other year, people are going to be paying a lot of attention to what happens for Georgia at quarterback. And the fact that on paper, to our eyes, Gunner and Carson are seemingly so different, vehicle choices, lifestyle choices, just everything about the two guys just seems so dramatically different. That only enhances the sort of natural soap opera that's going to exist around the Georgia quarterback position. And by the way, we don't have to sidestep some of this. It is pretty weird and frankly not very commendable that Beck left without telling anybody he was leaving. You don't have to pretend that. Like the other day, you see where John Calipari and Rick Pitino were getting ready to play each other in the NCAA tournament, and they were both kind of saying the same thing, known each other for a long time, don't really pretend to be friends with each other. Not everybody has to be friends. Not everybody has to like every single thing that goes on. And when someone does something that's not exactly a commendable behavior, such as essentially, leaving without saying goodbye, you don't have to pretend that was, normal or whatever. And it certainly seems like there's a little bit of a tension there around all of that. Not for Gunner Stockton necessarily, but for the program overall. They didn't include, Carson in their season highlight video as a for instance on that. And that's sort of okay. Not everybody has to be friends. This is, it's not show friends, it's show business. So there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. But at the same time, stories like these and finding something interesting in everything that Gunner Stockton says, no matter how intentionally uninteresting it might have been, also just sort of demonstrates that you might as well embrace all of this. There is going to be a comparison that takes place. How well does Carson Beck do at Miami with different teammates compared to the job that Gunner Stockton does at Georgia with some of Carson Beck's old teammates? That's just sort of sports talk 101. And that's the thing that's going to be going on for Georgia here this season. It certainly seems like Georgia is very happy with its quarterback here right now and very satisfied with what he brings to the table for UGA. And if you're a Georgia fan, I think you're glad to hear that. But the idea of quarterback drama and who's in the job and how they're performing compared to other guys who've had that job before, when it comes to a place like Georgia, that's never going away. So if you are UGA, you might as well embrace it. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We are happy you are with us today, no matter how you get to us. It's video 10 a.m., it's radio Athens Sports Radio 960 Ref, podcast wherever you find them. Just really, really glad you're here. So thankful to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make today's show possible, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. And obviously the race to support your favorite college team has never been more intense around the entire country than it is right now. Everybody wanting to do every little thing they can. And one of the things I think is great in that regard is to support the companies that have made a big point of supporting UGA. That's what Breda Pest Management is, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. And I think it just feels good. We're always thankful that you support those who've been with us for a long time, and certainly Breda long-time supporters of ours, but also big-time supporters of UGA too. It just sort of feels good to do business with people who kind of align themselves with the things that you believe in. And good stuff for Georgia, something we all kind of hope for, and our friends at Breda Pest Management are right there on that too. But when you make the switch to Breda Pest Management for your termite protection or your bugs, your critters, you'll come up on like a mosquito time of year, things like that. When it comes to all this kind of stuff, when you make the switch, you're not only going to get the peace of mind of knowing you're working with a company that's been in business since 1975 with 125 employees all across our market area. And as I said before, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. In addition to that, you're also going to put more money back in your pocket just for making that decision. That is what Breda Pest Management is all about. So I'm going to invite you to make the switch today. Find out more online. It's BredaPest.com. BREDA, BredaPest.com for more on that. Always love having our friends at Breda Pest Management as a part of DawgNation Daily. All right, busy show for us. It's Davin Bellamy later on. Mike Griffith here coming up in just a couple of minutes. Prior to that, let's get a little bit more deeply into what's going on at Georgia spring practice as we go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And I always think it's interesting, I said before, sometimes with the press conferences and the interviews and who's talking, sometimes there's what almost seems to be, even if it's not, it certainly seems to be at times, a very intentional attempt to be as unrevealing as possible, to reveal as little as possible. But that's not always the way things go. Sometimes there's a little bit more on the record for consumption. Here's just the matter-of-fact statement of what is true. And we did get a little bit of that from Kirby Smart yesterday on an issue unrelated to the quarterback spot. Kirby Smart laid it out as he's evaluating how practices are going, what a couple points of emphasis have been for Georgia during this spring practice. I think you'll find this to be interesting because it is quite specific from Kirby Smart. Here is, in the midst of evaluating how practices are going, a couple of things, kind of opposite sides of the same coin, that Smart says they are trying to work on here right now. This is Kirby Smart.
Most progress. We practiced better since the last time I saw you guys. I think that I've had 3 practices since then. We had a Wednesday, Thursday, a Saturday, and a Tuesday. They were actually, it was actually much better last Thursday in terms of throwing and catching. The offense jumped out ahead. Quarterbacks and receivers I thought had a good day. I'd be remiss if I tried to judge it today, but there's been growth. I mean, we put a big emphasis on running and stopping the run because we feel like we lacked in both those areas last year. So the spring practice has been shifted or adjusted a little bit towards stopping the run and being able to run the ball. I don't know if we've improved on it, but we've harped on it.
I don't know if it's just my sarcastic sense of humor and what, but the line there at the end of, I don't know if we've improved on it, but we've harped on it, that's really funny to me. I don't know. Maybe that's just my own sarcasm kind of showing through, but that's very funny from Kirby Smart, but also very specific. He says, points of emphasis for us have been stopping the run and obviously generating more success with our own running game. And once again, I don't take that as a kind of a throwaway line. I take that as quite important, that, as we've said before, defensively, when it comes to taking away the run, and admittedly, I'll be the first to acknowledge this, that's not quite as exciting as pass pressure, quarterback sacks, things like that. But if you can take away your opponent run game, then you're essentially chopping them off at the knees. You're basically beating them in the coach's meeting room. We saw this. Y'all remember, obviously one of our favorite punching bags, but going back to Dan Mullen at Florida in 2019, when he was criticized after another loss to Georgia. There were many of those for him, of course. He was criticized in his post-game press conference for not running the ball more. And Mullen's answer was something to the effect of, we didn't want to run the ball. We decided we didn't think we needed to run the ball. And we made a huge deal about that at the time on the show of, do you know how successful you are as a defensive coach if you convince your opponent in its coaches' meetings and team meetings prior to the game and their game planning sessions prior to the game to not even try running plays, to essentially enter a game playing one-handed, to essentially go into a game with half your playbook, to look around and say, we can't run the ball in this Georgia defense anyway, so we might as well just pass it every down. We're going to volunteer ourselves to be one-dimensional. Do you know how much success that sets up your defense for? So while it's less interesting than overall pass rush perhaps, it is certainly a very valuable part of the overall defensive success to say, when we've got really good run-stopping defensive linemen, we're fully committed to that. We can make you one-dimensional, and then we can play you under those rules, knowing that you're going to throw the ball. Coverage gets better, pass rush gets better. Everything gets easier once we know you're throwing it, and if our rush defense is good enough, we certainly know that you're throwing it. I just think that's football. It may even be lower than 101, but sometimes the most basic truths are the most truthful. I certainly think that's one of those. Then on the flip side of this, in the ongoing discussion of how much is Georgia acknowledging areas in which we would say they obviously need to get better. this is another one of those examples of clearly, openly, for everyone to hear, Kirby Smart says, we need to rush the football better. That certainly matches the statistics that have been kicked around and some of the fan discussion that's been going on for the last few months. Smart's remedy for that may not be the same as some fans would have wanted, but it is an open acknowledgement of we need to get better in this area. And as someone who's also a Georgia fan myself, I take a lot of comfort in that what the stats seem to say, what other Georgia fans are saying, at least in that particular case, Smart is echoing it too, of we want to be better when it comes to running the ball. And obviously the prime contribution to more rushing success are the guys who are running it for you. And one of the known commodities seemingly for Georgia this upcoming year is obviously Nate Frazier. Big deal to have Frazier back this season. We think that Frazier could be in line for a very good year. But obviously in college football, especially in the SEC, multiple running backs typically have a role. One of the things we know right now is two guys that have become well-known with Georgia fans, Branson Robinson, Roderick Robinson. They're not quite there yet. And Kirby Smart did give some voice to that yesterday. You can go to the DawgNation YouTube page and hear more of what Smart said about the Robinsons. They're kind of working to be back, but they are not back yet. So therefore, what about other young running backs? What about Chauncey Bowens? What about Dwight Phillips? What about the other guys who kind of go along with Nate Frazier right now? Once again, Kirby Smart gave us some more information about that.
Chauncey and Dwight have been great bright spots there. In my opinion, they both are getting better. They're competing. Dwight's hit some big runs. Chauncey's made some really good cuts. Nate's been very consistent. And then Dylan Bell has taken some reps there. We mixed Dylan in practice to practice. He works in the slot. He's tried to develop as a wide receiver and a back. He's been great in like a good attitude and being committed to coach. If it means me playing 10, 15 snaps at back, I want to do it. If I can develop as a slot, I want to do it. So those guys have been good. A couple of young guys, Micah, Bell, Dylan's brothers, doing a big job in there, getting reps. Slay Penn is a nice shot. So really proud of the way those guys compete and work and take the reps.
So a couple of things there. First of all, last week you had the coaches clinic going on in Georgia, and so a lot of coaches went, and there's no shortage of like rumor mill stuff when it comes to coaches. They're always, pretty loose-lipped about certain things. And so we've been hearing various things that have been going on at Georgia practice the last couple of days. And one of the things that has come up from people who saw practice was, Dylan Bell kind of getting involved as a running back. And I tell you, I think that's such good news for Georgia. Not that Dylan won't be doing, and Kirby Smart kind of confirming that with his words there, of course. I think that's such good news for Georgia because obviously we think that Bell's still got a role as a wide receiver. He may even be what you think of as sort of a starting wide receiver for Georgia. But his highest and best use for UGA is probably as a little bit of a slash style player. He's a wide receiver, but he also gets some carries. Heck, against Tennessee a couple of years ago, he threw for a touchdown. That if you want a innovative Georgia offense, using your most versatile weapons in all the ways they can be used is one of the best ways to demonstrate that innovation. And we think from Dylan Bell this year, there's a chance that could be the case, and Kirby Smart seemingly confirms that there as him being a part of the running game. But it's also true that sometimes what you don't hear, the dog that doesn't bark, is kind of interesting. And Smart talks a lot about a lot of guys toting the football for Georgia. The name that's conspicuously absent from all that is Bo Walker. And, we really try to be careful not to be, rattling pots and pans and fanning the flames of hysteria and stuff like that. We really try not to do too much of that because it's unfair to the player. It's just unfair to everybody involved. Unfair to even you to overstate things. But I will tell you, you talk to people who see Georgia practice. You talk to people who, as I like to say, kind of know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. They really do think Bo Walker's going to be a big part of this. They really, really do. And in the discussion of what else does Georgia have in addition to Nate Frazier, Bo Walker may turn out to be the incoming freshman, an emphatic answer to that question. In a roundabout way, the fact that Kirby doesn't mention him at all right there, to me, maybe makes it seem even more true that perhaps could eventually be the case. So a lot of fun to think about. Obviously, Georgia trying to get the running game back to kind of RBU standards, and we'll see here in 2025 that, along with improved rush defense too, if Georgia is indeed able to do that. And that's Around the Doghouse here today, presented by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, listen, when it comes to insurance, you have to have it. Legally, auto insurance, obviously your home insurance, these are like non-negotiable things. You got to have it. So the question that you're left with is, okay, well, who do I choose to work with? And how do I make the best decision about that? My advice is always going to be, pick up the phone and talk to people and get a sense. Are these people friendly? Are these Georgians? Do these people understand my life? Are they in communities like I'm in across the state of Georgia? Well, that's what our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau are. It's a history of service, obviously starting off with our farmers and our agricultural community, but now extending that same level of service to you when it comes to your insurance needs. So I want you to give them a call today. It's 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online at gfbinsurance.com. I'll give you the website one more time, gfbinsurance.com, and have a conversation. Let them explain to you all the options they have and find out what we've been saying now for quite some time. The Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. And it's, of course, great to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. Great guest coming up later on. It's Davin Bellamy. Looking forward to that. But for now, on everything else going on at Georgia Spring Practice, let's talk to Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Interesting to hear from Kirby Smart a moment ago, being very clear about points of emphasis. We want to be better at stopping the run. We want to be better at running the football. That's what Kirby Smart said yesterday. We'll begin that with Mike Griffith here right now, starting with those running backs, Mike. Obviously Nate Frazier is something close to a known commodity. We saw a lot of him last year. I believe when you start making like statistical comparisons and things like that, he can be in line with some of the really successful running backs we've seen during the Kirby Smart era. But the question also kind of goes to, well, what else is there in addition to Nate Frazier? So I'll begin with what Kirby Smart was just discussing. What else does Georgia have right now in addition to Nate Frazier?
Well, Dylan Bell's getting some work there. Obviously, I mean, that's your first sign that the depth is a bit of a question. And plus, Dylan has those talents. We've seen him provide some sparks there, as well as some versatility as a pass catcher out of the backfield. You like what he brings. He's explosive. He's got a nice forward lean. He's certainly got a background there. I like that. I'm excited about that. I think that's another tool in the toolbox. And Cash Jones certainly proved himself last year as a receiver out of the backfield and really made a lot of clutch plays. If you look at what George is getting out of Cash Jones, speaking of cash and this new salary cap structure, it's kind of nice to have a guy back there to make those kind of level of plays that, maybe you didn't have to spend $500,000 or $600,000 for out of the portal or in the recruiting cycle. So, you've got a nice bonus there, and we're hearing good things about Bo Walker. So I feel like the backfield's adequate. Brandon, I'm doing a story and I'm about ready to post it on DawgNation, and Kaylee Manziel and myself on the Beat Monday night. We identified 4 players that really had to hit. And Nate Frazier was one of mine, and not just from a production standpoint, but you think about how dynamic his personality is and how much energy he brings. And I think energy and leadership, listening to Kirby Smart, I think these are going to be really important things for Georgia in the offseason and into the season. They don't necessarily have the star power that we've seen in the past, right? If we were to say, who's their first round picks next year? I think we'd be hard pressed to find anyone that we'd say, yeah, that's a slam dunk. One other note I would make on this running game that I think is really important to realize is that this has a lot to do with the defense too. And here's what I mean by that. When you're winning games, or games are even, and you're not playing catch up, it gives you the ability to be a little bit more balanced and play call from a position of power, as opposed to when you're trying to catch up. The Alabama game is a great example. The Georgia Tech game, where you're having to scramble. All of a sudden now your run-pass ratio gets out of whack. And so at the end of the day, you're not running for as many yards. Now, from an efficiency standpoint, I don't think that the drop-off has been quite as drastic. But when we look at the pure numbers and why Georgia's running game and how many yards per game they got was so low, I think a lot of it was situational. And I'm going to throw a defensive number at you, even though we're talking about running backs. I mean, this is, pretty eye-opening. Last year they were 36th in the nation in run defense. You say, well, that's not Georgia. Well, that was down from 18th the year before. But you look at that championship run, and I know you know this, 2022, they led the nation in run defense.
Yeah.
2021, they were second in the nation in run defense. And in 2020 and 2019, they also led the nation in defense. So when your defense isn't getting as many 3-and-out stops, you're not getting as many possessions, right? Not as many plays. And when you're playing from behind, the run-pass ratio can get a little out of whack. So I don't think we just point to the running backs when we talk about the run game and the drop-off and what needs to happen for those numbers to return to what we're accustomed to. I think we have to look at it from more of a macro sense than the micro sense.
Yeah, when it comes to like national ranks, one of the things I think about them is in terms of kind of like percentiles. You know, there are 130-something teams that play FBS football. So if you're 30-something in any category, you're sort of below the 80th percentile. You're kind of getting down there in that sort of, sort of below the top quartile when it comes to stuff like that. And it's okay to be national average in some things. No one's going to be elite across the board. It's okay to be national average in some things. But for a program like Georgia, probably you want to be in that 90th percentile when it comes to, somewhere in the top 15 or so when it comes, 13, 14, 15 or so when it comes to rush defense, just because that's been such an important recipe for UGA. Let me give you a slightly different spin on Dillon Bell from what you just said, though. Listen, the Georgia running game is certainly not a proven position group. There's no disputing that. But when I think about Bell in particular, one of the reasons why I like the idea of him getting carries right now is it just stands to reason that every player would want to be maximized for their NFL potential and the money they could make. That means in a year like 2024, obviously, and I'm led to believe this was probably the case, Bell wanted to see himself as a wide receiver because wide receivers just get paid so much money in the NFL. The fact that now he is, going to be apparently used in creative ways, a little bit like he was in 2023, I think speaks to Georgia getting the most out of him. Putting aside whatever the Georgia running game is, Bell, to me, is a much more valuable player at Georgia when he's used in a variety of ways. Heck, against Tennessee in 2023, he threw a touchdown pass. That this is a little bit of a slash player. If you want to call him a gadget player, you could do that too. Last year, kind of mostly used just as a wide receiver, but I don't think that represents his highest and best use. I think a little bit more of what we saw from him in 2023 is actually Dillon Bell at his most valuable.
Yeah, and certainly the value certainly stands out with both of the Robinsons' health status, still kind of a bit in question from Kirby's last report. One other thing I wanted to throw in there on our statistical conversation about where Georgia ranks, we also kind of have to look at this as being a bit of a curve, right? It's almost like when you play in the SEC, it's the equivalent of taking an honors class in school, right? The other students in the classroom are all elite. So when you compare the 8th place team in the SEC, it's probably the second best team in a lot of conferences. Maybe not the Big Ten, maybe drop it to 3rd and 4th. So relative to the schedule Georgia plays and relative to the conference, while on a national scale, it may appear that Georgia's only in the 25th percentile, nationally, it's still very possible they're in the top 10 percentile. But because of the level of competition that they're playing every week, it looks a little bit different. I know Kirby Smart made reference to that statistic and the perspective on that when we were talking about the rankings last year and how the committee might look at them. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to throw that caveat in there to say, oh my gosh, they're in the 25th percentile. Well, nationally, but yes, nationally they are, but only because of their schedule difficulty. I dare say if they were in the Big 12 or the ACC, they might rank in the top 10 in virtually every category.
You mentioned having Nate Frazier as among your most important players for Georgia going back to On the Beat on Monday and the time we have left. Give me the other names that you and Kaylee kicked around there on Monday evening.
Well, I think Christian Miller was a high priority free agent. Let's call it what it is. This is a guy that could have gone pro. I think you identified this and interviewed Christian back before the Sugar Bowl. You need your best player to also be one of your hardest workers. And the investment that Georgia's made in Christian and the investment that Christian's made in another year's school, he's going to need to be a leader. I'm going to stay on this leadership tack because Kirby's identified this team as needing a little more passion. Well, there's only so much the coaches can do. A lot of this, when we reflect back on the championship team, Jordan Davis was certainly integral as a vocal leader. Brock Bowers with his work ethic. That leadership came from within. And so when I talk about Nate Frazier and his dynamic personality and the ability to be a vocal leader, when I talk about Christian Miller being the tip of the spear on the run defense. I talk about C.J. Allen by nature of his position as the Mike linebacker, a third-year starter, a Georgia kid who represents an entire town there in Barnesville. This is a guy who can help transcend the defense, not just from the Mike linebacker position, like Monty Rice, like Nakobe Dean, but fill those shoes as a leader. And then finally, I said whoever was at quarterback. Gunner Stockton stepped behind the microphone last night. And while he certainly didn't say a lot of things, one of the things you note about Gunner, that was by design. This is a very cerebral kid. Obviously, everything he said about his teammates was positive. What we don't know, and what we probably will get a better grasp of in the spring game, is how does Gunner affect the play of those around him? And not just with his passes. I have no doubt that his passing will be accurate. We know that he is a maestro of this offense, and he's an absolutely one of these film rats. He's always in there watching film. He's way ahead in the game. He understands all the responsibilities. But can his personality ignite those around him to work with him, especially when we talk about off-season workouts? I don't think I'm revealing any secrets when I say that there were some questions about how Carson Beck worked with his teammates in the offseason and how he connected. The head coach said that, right? As talented as Carson was, it looked like they started the season playing a little bit of catch-up, right? Where does Gunner Stockton have these receivers in terms of their knowledge of the offense and his continuity with them and his timing with them? And is there still that possibility of the outside quarterback? I think as time goes and the fact that Kirby puts Gunner behind the microphone, I think he's certainly putting him front and center with an opportunity to lead. I don't completely discount that, Brandon. But I do think that quarterback position, right now we look to Gunner Stockton, that would be the fourth place by the nature of the position, the importance of it. And as Billy Napier told me at the Senior Bowl, and I think he's right about this, the quarterback sets the tone in the building. I think a lot of what you're seeing at Florida has to do with DJ Lagway. And I think Georgia needs that sort of presence at quarterback to lead and set the proper tone in the building.
Mike, great stuff. We'll look forward to reading plenty more from you at DawgNation.com. And by the way, check out On the Beat from Monday. Basketball coach Mike White stopping by to kind of give his thoughts in the season. We'll watch that. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for being here today. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
Good to see you yesterday, Brandon. Thank you very much. Take care.
Indeed, that's the case.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
We don't have a lot of meetings around here. I'm thankful for that. But we did have kind of a big one yesterday. A little team get together, so I did get a chance to see Mike in person. Rare opportunity there on that. Speaking of great guests, we're not done with those today. We'll also hear from Davin Bellamy before we're done today. Prior to that, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here today. And let's talk about all the great things happening with Royal Caribbean. You know, this morning I was on with my friends 963F in Athens. Logan, one of the hosts, was asking me, because he's got his own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation coming up. He's like, BA, tell me about Perfect Day CocoCay. And what I told him was, and this is like not just, this is like friend to friend, just this is the advice I'd give anybody, is that the thing about Perfect Day CocoCay that I think is so awesome is the way they have the island sort of divided up into sections. And like one of the main sections is the Thrill Water Park. And so, you know, if you've got kids, they obviously love that. If you're sort of a kid at heart, you may love that too. And, you know, if you want to get to like the Hideaway Beach and just enjoy that part of it, kind of adults only, or if you want to kind of relax on the chill island and have the Oasis Lagoon pool or all the area around the beach, you can do that. But if you really want to get into the mix and have a great water park experience, tallest water slide in North America, and a whole collection of really fun, very, very interesting water slides, just an incredible experience, like right there in the middle of what is honestly just like paradise. The Bahamian waters, I always feel like, are just the prettiest water you're going to see anywhere. I mean, it is like crystal blue when you're out at sea, but it's like so see-through and clear when you're there at Perfect Day CocoCay. Y'all, I mean, of all the things I've ever told you, nothing is more true than this. The Perfect Day CocoCay, one of the best experiences you're ever going to have. So Jessica Slater, wonderful travel agent, she can tell you all about it. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com, and she'll plan a wonderful Royal Caribbean cruise vacation for you here today. All right, we begin with breaking news. Former Georgia wide receiver RaRa Thomas has found a new home. This happening just before we came on the air today, I believe. RaRa Thomas on his way to Troy. So a year ago, obviously promising return for Georgia. Thomas, who had not really done very much in 2023, but people thought he had a chance to do some stuff in 2024. Obviously some off-field troubles ended his time at Georgia, but he will further his career there at Troy. This coming out just a couple moments ago. Also, as Mike Griffith referenced, we do know the start time for G-Day for Georgia on April 12th. It is going to be 1 p.m. No television, no streaming video coverage. But the fact there is a start time for the game does make me a little bit more confident that the game itself is actually going to take place. And that kind of puts Georgia in a category with, like, say, Ohio State and Oregon, some of these teams that are seemingly still committed to having spring games, and very different from other programs such as, like, say, Texas, Alabama, who seem to want those to go away. I guess you can add now to this Auburn and its program, and some very revealing comments from Hugh Freeze yesterday that sort of let us know that Auburn's kind of going the other direction as far as spring game stuff goes. That apparently A-Day, which is what Auburn will have, it's always been weird to me that both Auburn and Alabama, their spring game has been called the same thing. They're both called A-Day. That seems incredibly confusing, but nonetheless. That A-Day is going to be an hour-long practice, and it's going to be open to fans. And there's going to be an autograph session when it's all done. So perhaps not terrible for fans, but it's not a spring game. Now, I'll also say this. I'm a little bit of a spring game connoisseur in that I love the way that Georgia has historically done this. I don't know they'll do it this way this year, but it's like good on good. Ones take on ones, twos take on twos, sort of a fair fight competition. Auburn, to me, has sort of always been a little bit of a pro wrestling style spring game where there's kind of a predetermined outcome. Like a lot of times throughout history, man, some of this probably goes back to the Gus Malzahn era. You'll have like the number one offense against like the walk-on defense. It's like we're kind of designed to make the offense look good here. So Auburn's always been a little bit of a team that's kind of taken some liberties with its spring game. But nonetheless, Freeze saying, I think the days of a spring game where you're televising that and the portal opens the next week, that doesn't make much sense. We went down the list of all the injured guys for us, trying to divide up and have some kind of game. It just doesn't make as much sense of us doing that what we did today. We'll have some live periods, but it'll be much more of a practice format. So there you go. That might be where all this is heading. Certainly seems like that's the case. Freeze also seems to leave the door open for eventually like playing maybe a spring game or some sort of preseason game against another opponent. But obviously, if that ever happens, that's a long way from happening. Let me also just say this really quick, and this is, I'll do this very, very fast because I want to talk to Davin Bellamy. The basketball portal has opened. We got like 1,000 guys in the portal here already. The tournament's still going on. This thing is such a total mess right now that I just don't see how this is good for anybody. And you'll hear coaches complain about this. And one of the things that'll happen is, see, part of the reason why so many people not only tolerate the drama of transfer portal, but kind of secretly like it is they sort of view coaches and just the coaching profession in general is sort of a tyrannical hierarchy. Like, who are these guys to make millions of dollars? And, who are these guys to sort of have all this power, control, authority? There's sort of an anti-coaching strain that seems to exist in some of all of this. And so the purpose of a system is what it does. And so if the system makes coaches' lives more miserable, that sort of explains all you need to understand. You can sort of just end with that if you want to. But the point we always make is like, what about the players? All of this is being done under the guise of, hey, this is what's good for the players. But for every 1,000 players who move, 1,000 other players are also displaced. Do we understand that? I don't know that we fully do. That for every 1,000 players who find a new home, that means 1,000 players that would have been in that spot are not going to be in that spot. They're either cut from the team, that goes on. Sometimes they move on to the NBA or they transfer themselves. Sometimes that does happen, of course. But they're cut from the team. They're a high school kid that just doesn't get the scholarship. And by the way, talk to parents of young men trying to get these scholarships right now across all sports. Hard to come by. They are hard to come by. Or, in some cases, the number of available scholarships just sort of going down. Like, think about this. A couple of instances. See where Drake this year, they pulled the first round upset against Missouri. Coach comes up from Division II, brings like 4 of his players with him, which is kind of a cool story. I'm not against that necessarily. But once again, if Drake is kind of like bringing sort of a ready-made team up and calling it its team. That means a lot of kids in the past that would have sort of hoped to get an offer from Drake, get a chance to sign a scholarship with Drake. Like, where are they going? Where are they playing? In some cases, it's nowhere. I mean, like literally in some cases, it's nowhere. They're going nowhere. Or did you see this? And, this will be the first time we've ever mentioned St. Francis on this show. We don't really get into the St. Francis basketball stories very much. Did you see where St. Francis, a team that, by the way, made the NCAA tournament, won their conference, played in the first four. I guess they lost their first four games to Alabama State, but they played in the Dayton games last week. Did you see where they announced they're dropping down from Division I to Division III? That means 12 guys who would have had Division I scholarships no longer have Division I scholarships. That's 12 fewer scholarships in Division I college basketball. And I get it. Nobody cares about St. Francis. I totally understand that. Nobody cares about St. Francis. You don't probably either. But just notice this, that while everybody laughs at the coaches for having to manage the forced chaos that's been imposed on them, on the edges, at the margins, college athletics is getting smaller. St. Francis is going from Division I to Division III in basketball. Look around at how few fun upsets we had in March Madness. And listen, there's always been a little bit of a hypocrisy about that. We like the round one upsets, but historically that's always made fewer people watch the tournament as the tournament goes on. But nonetheless, it becomes easier to exclude those mid-major teams from the tournament in the future if they're no longer winning games when they're there, and the absence of quality talent is making that more difficult to do. College football. It used to be that Washington State, Oregon State, they were major college programs. They no longer are. They don't have a conference to call home. They're no longer major conference programs. And once again, you don't really care about Washington State or Oregon State either. But just please notice that in all of this NIL transfer portal stuff that's supposed to be for the players, does it really even benefit the majority of players? And if you put all of this up to a vote for every player to kind of weigh in on, if so-and-so having enough money to buy a Lamborghini results in a series of unintended consequences that means a whole other bunch of so-and-sos don't even have a scholarship, is that really a better trade? Like, is that really what all of this is for? Those seem like fair questions and perhaps not rhetorical ones. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I joked a few weeks ago. Do you remember this? We're talking about Jim Rome, the legend in sports talk, how when a guest is going to be on, as it gets closer to time for the guest to be on, if it hasn't been fully confirmed, it goes from so-and-so is going to be with us at 10:45 to all of a sudden now they're scheduled to appear. We've sort of veered into scheduled to appear territory when it comes to Davin Bellamy here today, which is totally understandable. Many of you know a couple of weeks ago, Davin got another football job. He's back in the UFL again with the DC Defenders. I thought we had that lined up with him today, but that's on me. Davin obviously busy taking care of his football business, but I have heard through our intermediaries here that Davin is looking forward to still being with us week to week here, but apparently not quite this week. So I'm going to take the L on that and kind of own my role in that. I promised Davin Bellamy not ready for us here today, but we're going to get Davin back on. We've confirmed that. Apparently just not ready to go for us here today. So let me instead give a shout out to our friends at the Finish Long Drink here. You're getting ready to, speaking of watching some of that basketball or maybe the portal chaos makes you feel like you need to kind of kick back and enjoy a beverage. Well, either way, the Finish Long Drink's there for you, whether it's the traditional citrus, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, the long drink strong, that's 8.5% alcohol by volume, long drink cranberry, a long drink zero, that's no carbs, no sugar, the peach flavored version for a limited time in the Peach State. A lot of folks out playing golf right now, enjoying a lot of stuff outside. Whatever you're enjoying, the Finish Long Drink, a great way to enjoy all of that. So please make sure you check all of that out today. You can find them online, thelongdrink.com, and at the website, you can put in your zip code, and you can figure out where to pick up some Finish Long Drink here today. It's delicious. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. It's a mixed drink. You don't have to mix yourself. Who wouldn't love that? And in this fun category of beverage, there is no competitor in that category that tastes better. Dominating from a flavor standpoint, we would say our friends at the Finish Long Drink. So check it out today online, thelongdrink.com. Of course, loving having them a part for now a long time here at DawgNation Daily. And as we say goodbye, a little running back talk earlier in the show. Of all of our listeners, I don't know that anybody loves Georgia running backs more than our buddy Frankie Fibonacci. He's a well-known YouTube commenter to us, watches the show live frequently. And he gave a shout out to Branson Robinson about the eventual comeback for Branson Robinson. Frankie writing in to say, I've been trying to tell your listeners, but they don't believe me. Shaking my head. Hashtag golden shoe. Hashtag RBU. And we're right there with you, Frankie. Obviously, it sounds like Branson and Roderick, too, for that matter, got a ways to go in terms of getting back to full health. But when they do, we think that Branson Robinson can still be an outstanding running back. And glad to see Frankie kind of carrying that tradition and keeping all that alive. Good stuff from Frankie. We'll give him a golden shoe. Love even numbers around here. Today we got a good one. How about 1,600 days? 1,600. That's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten Georgia in football. You beat them in basketball. You dominate in baseball. And, of course, long winning streak in football. We love all of that. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, they show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. I'm going to start on Facebook here today. I am going to go off my phone here on Facebook because I'm still not signed in on Facebook. I always just forget to do that. But we'll get some comments here. We'll see how everybody's doing. I'll also turn myself down. Bill Sanders is very funny about how the Facebook chat sort of always all over the place, eventually kind of veering towards food. There is a lot of that goes on, which I don't mind. Good to see James Schofield in here today. Bill Sanders also on the subject of grits. I always feel like that one of the reasons why Northerners don't really understand grits is because there are a lot of bad grits. If you ever have like those like watery, kind of just, that just sort of, I don't know, they're just bad grits out there. Like I want, how if you go to like the one fast food place and you get the sort of famous ice cream item that the fast food place is known for, they'll turn it upside down to give it to you. Here's a general rule. I kind of want my grits to be not actually turned upside down, but I sort of want you to be able to turn them upside down. We have grits sometimes in the morning for breakfast on the weekends. I try not to eat too much because obviously that's a lot of carbs. But I like grits that you can eat with a fork. If you have to use a spoon, that's not the kind of grits I want. I want pretty viscous grits. And so I would say that, a lot of cheese, a lot of butter, a lot of salt, I want a lot in there to sort of create kind of a certain kind of consistency. And if you've had those grits, the sort of thing you would eat with shrimp, of course, anybody would love that. And if you've had this sort of watery, blandness, well, of course, no one would like that. Darkbrook says, can y'all stream G-Day? Don't think I haven't thought about that. The answer is probably no, although goodness knows somebody probably will. But no, the answer is probably will not be. But I did think about that. It's like, well, gosh, if there's no rights holder here, is that fair game? But the honest truth is no. But I did think about that. I definitely thought about that. It's funny that you would bring that up. Alan Verbanchik also likes thick grits. Let's see what else. Grady Darcy, Philip Jordan Wells talking about the various companies that are owned. Oh, is that right? So famous hot sauce is owned by a Georgia person. See, one of the things that I'm not very good at is, and I'm going to end up saying something I want to say, but it's like, like some people when it comes to like companies and products and things like that, they know like everything that company believes about every single thing. And like, it becomes a little bit of like a political choice sometimes of, well, I don't do this, I don't do that because so-and-so. And somehow they know like the parent company that owns the thing and the whatever else. Like, I just don't, I mean, listen, I have closely held beliefs, but I can't keep up with like what corporations believe. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for me. That would be a lot of work. and like, which conglomeration owns this other thing, whatever else. There's also sort of a college football version of that where it's like, well, did you know that so-and-so CEO went to so-and-so school and blah, blah, blah. Like every now and then some of these kind of become sort of famous, but that's another one of those things I've just never been very good at keeping up with. I'm probably saying more than I want to, but that was the sort of thing that kind of came. Philip Jordan Wells, Jacob O'Neill, also about hash browns. I like hash browns a lot. I also like, what do you call them? Home fries. I like home fries. I like that a lot. Let's see what else. UGA Marine says Northerners don't understand grits because it's the same people that put pasta in their chili. I'm going to plead ignorance here for a little bit. That's solely a Cincinnati thing, though, right? Like that's not like a New York thing. That's just Cincinnati, right? And I sort of think of Cincinnati as sort of like a place unto itself. Like it's in Ohio, but it's very southern Ohio. Like, and here's a little known fact. You can win a bar bet with somebody on this. The closest Major League Baseball franchise to Atlanta is Cincinnati. Almost no one would realize that. But if you got in a car, like I'm not too far from Truist Park right now. If I got in a car from here and drove to the closest Major League ballpark to my home team's ballpark, it'd be Great American, as they call it, small park. It'd be Great American in Cincinnati. So I sort of think of Cincinnati. To me, Cincinnati's basically Kentucky, which is also kind of the weirdest state in the South. Probably Southern. You'd have to say it is. But sort of a weird version of Southern, I would say. It's like not quite Appalachian, but it's also not quite the same Southern as we are down here in the Deep South. It's sort of its own thing. And I think historically that's even been true. I would say that Cincinnati has a lot more in common with Kentucky than it does, certainly like Northeast Ohio, where like Cleveland and stuff is. I would say a Clevelander and a Cincinnatiite, is that how you say that? I would say those are very different people by and large. I don't think of Cincinnati people as quite as northern as I would think of other Ohioans being. DT on the subject of the meeting yesterday. Yeah, listen, sometimes, here's the thing about like the comments. If my bosses had their way, I'd do less comments. They want the shows to be shorter. So the comments and like whatever, before the show or after the show, this is at least at the length that I do them, this is pretty well just a thing that I do because, the big tech algo sort of favors slightly shorter shows. So that's sort of their perspective on that kind of thing. Is like going as long as we do, hour and a half most days, that's just sort of a thing that I do. DT asks it closer in Tampa Bay. Yeah, Tampa's actually decently, like I've driven Tampa a few times. Tampa's about like 10 hours away. Tampa's farther than you think it might be. You can be in Cincinnati 8 hours from now. See, Garrison Tucker agrees. Kentucky, probably weirdest state in the South. Not the weirdest state overall, but I would say it is of all of like the heritage SEC states, it's probably the weirdest, I would say. And by weird, I just mean different from the rest of us, not necessarily bad. Because I know a lot of people from Kentucky that are nice. And honestly, Lexington, one of the best places you can visit. That's also another place. A lot of Georgia fans sort of think of, Georgia playing Kentucky, that somehow Lexington's in another galaxy. It's not a hard drive at all. And I say this as someone who enjoys driving. Lexington is not a hard drive. It's super easy. And it's gorgeous, gorgeous. Like as much as it pains me to admit, like that part of East Tennessee, kind of where Knoxville is pretty. Like you can say what you want to about the people who live there, but the actual, the actual topography is gorgeous. And you get above Knoxville, it's even prettier. So it's a fun, pretty drive. You know, Lexington, by sort of legacy SEC standards, it's a pretty big town. Really kind of cool. A pretty nice place to visit. Pretty nice place to visit. DT says Tampa 6. Tampa ain't no 6 hours. Hold on. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. Let's see if I can get a signal in here. I'm getting 7 hours, 10 minutes to Tropicana Field right now. So it's a little closer than I said. So let's see. So I'm getting 7 hours, 10 minutes to Tropicana Field, which is a little closer. Let's see. Hold on one second. I know this is riveting. A riveting video right now. Yeah, so Great American Ballpark is only 357 miles from here, 6 hours, 37 minutes. So, I mean, that doesn't seem crazy. That according to this navigation app, which is wrong about half the time, to be completely honest with you, I can be – all right, quiet. I can be Tropicana Field, 7 hours, 10 minutes. I can be Great American Ballpark, 6 hours, 37 minutes. So Tampa is – for whatever reason, when I drive to Tampa, it feels like it takes forever. Takes forever. Garrison Tucker says, he goes, hell, Athens to Atlanta is like 6 hours if you leave at 5 p.m. There is some of that. It's like the old joke, you know, a lot of this stuff's corny, but the idea that everything is like Atlanta is an hour away from Atlanta, sort of feels like that's true. And you try to fight 316 to get to Athens. Boy, that is rough stuff. That is rough stuff. All right, let's see what the YouTube folks are doing. Taylor Russell says Charleston's my favorite Southern town. It really is amazing. And, like, Charleston's one of those things that's pretty close. So I think that people sort of overlook it as it's largely considered one of the best places you can visit, period. And it's sort of good for whatever you like. If you only want to do the history stuff, you can do that. If you want to do kind of like the hipster type scene, you can do that. If you want to do like really, really nice restaurants, accommodations, you can do that. If you want to do something a little bit more down home, you can kind of do that. Like, it's got a lot of lanes for people to live in. But if you told me right now you can spend a weekend, like not like Vegas or something like that, but like just to sort of have a nice weekend somewhere, the combination of all the different things you can do, Charleston's about as good as anything. It really is. Probably about as good as anything. Gary Roach says he's eating a lot of grits, thinking my wife makes the best ones. I can't eat cheese anymore because I've had heart surgery, but lots of butter. Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, we try to have a little weekend breakfast at home, things like that. Get a little grits going with that. It's always great. Always great. G. Grace also asks about chili, about the no beans, the bean chili. I used to be sort of very into like no bean chili, but in a weird way, I'm kind of coming back around on the beans a little bit. I am kind of coming back around on those a little bit. Jonathan Aaron also shouting out St. Augustine. Yeah, listen, I love St. Augustine too, man. Love St. Augustine. That's one of the things that people don't realize about like the ongoing debate between like Jacksonville for the cocktail party. Like, some people think when we say Jacksonville, we mean Jacksonville, but we don't mean Jacksonville, not the city proper, although the city limits of Jacksonville are gigantic. Those of us who like going to Jacksonville, what we like is the areas around Jacksonville, Ponte Vedra, St. Augustine, Amelia Island, obviously the Golden Isles, the Georgia coast. The people that like to go to, quote unquote, Jacksonville, like staying in Jacksonville for about however long a game plus a tailgate is. That's the extent of time that many of them like to stay in the city limits. Now, a lot of the young people still like to cram 18 people into a downtown hotel room. But But, for the rest of us, going to Jacksonville means going to stay in an area around Jacksonville, and certainly St. Augustine would count as part of that. Let us see what else. So John Paul Williams said that grandfather made best chili. It's always fun to kind of think back on something like that, like a really good meal that, like, my grandmother was always cooking stuff. You think about the stuff they used to make, and you kind of like put yourself kind of back in that place and sort of re-experience those tastes, even if it's just from memory. And what he says was, you throw it on the spaghetti noodle as like a leftover the next day. Honestly, that probably would be pretty good, I'm guessing. Probably would be. I mean, in defense of that as an idea, it does give it just a little bit more like hearty substance, right? It's like, probably have a history of eating way too much, obviously. But like sometimes hard to convince me to sort of look at chili as a meal. Chili is sort of an accompaniment to a meal. But if you throw the noodles in there, it kind of makes it a little bit more of a meal. G. Grace shouting out the Waffle House hash browns. I like to put the Waffle House chili on the hash browns. I like to do that. I also like to sometimes dip the Texas bacon patty melt into the chili. I like to do that. And I'll give them a free ad because they're never advertising. Brady Pest Manager pointing out DJ Lagway tapped out last year in Jacksonville. You can't forget that. Sounds like he's still pretty banged up this spring, too. So whatever big, steps he plans on taking this year, perhaps not being taken this spring. RKD kind of comparing Bell to the Deebo Samuel role. I like that. And I'm not going to tell you, he's going to be as good as Deebo Samuel, but much more valuable to Georgia in a creative way. He may start at receiver, but still be used in other ways. I mean, for people who want a little bit more innovative Georgia offense, the easiest way to get innovation in your offense is to have innovative type players to be able to use. And I would say that Bell's one of those. Foster Moss says, is it called spachili as far as the spaghetti goes? I'm not sure. Dr. Gonzo is in Charleston. There you go. You'd love to see that. I've met a lot of great DawgNation Daily listeners throughout the years in Charleston. And one of the things, going back to our Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge, what's amazing is just how many people that listen to the show or watch the show are like living in all these very interesting places. It's really cool. It fills me with so much pride to know that. Henry Dion says 10 years ago or so, 5-star day cafe on Broad Street, the Arch, shut their doors, and Athens has been a poor place since. With respect to Mama's Boy, you haven't had a fried green tomato. So there you go. Yeah, there's those little places that have gone out of business where, like, I mean, there is no taste you crave more than a taste you can't have anymore. And whether it be from your hometown or in Athens or just various places like that, like a place that, our family, we recently closed, just a small place, not a famous place, but it's a place we loved. They closed, and it's like something about knowing, man, I'll never get that again. And whatever that is, isn't necessarily anything all that special. It's just a little thing that just sort of got you. Marvin B. Hall says, chili on noodles is just spaghetti. Perhaps that's the case. Let's see what else. MG says our running game is going to be so much better without Etienne and without Beck throwing it 40 times a game. I mean, listen, whatever it is, you're certainly hopeful that it's better and perhaps has a chance to be. G. Grace is putting leftover chili on white rice. I don't think I can condone that. Now, listen, I love gumbo. And obviously the rice is a big part of that. I don't know. Am I wrong about this? I don't know that I can condone the chili on the rice. I'll tell a quick story. No names here because I don't want to embarrass anybody involved. We were in New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl. A member of our DawgNation team, and I will not be revealing who this is. First of all, I probably gained, because we ended up staying in New Orleans longer than intended, and that was obviously for serious reasons, and I am not making a lot of that. But, when you stay in New Orleans for several days. Like, I probably gained 10 pounds in New Orleans, probably. I just love, like, the gumbo and the jambalaya. That is very filling food, but I really, really like it. And, you know, for, like, the Sugar Bowl and stuff like that, they just got these little things set up everywhere. They're just giving you gumbo everywhere you turn. You know, they just, you know, and it's all good, man. I love it. I love that. A member of our Dawg Nation team, though, at one of the meals that we shared together, did ask the waiter for some cheese to put into his gumbo. And you want to talk about offended? This waiter, I'd never seen a man so just downtrodden, crestfallen by this request. I had to apologize, and we kind of moved on. But yeah. Henry Dion brings up an interesting point. He says, you know, whether it be noodles or rice, mashed potatoes, whatever else, it's just a Band-Aid for those who can't take the heat. It's an interesting point. That's an interesting point that if you really can sort of just handle that heat, you don't maybe need anything to sort of step on it with. That's interesting. Interesting evaluation. G. Gray says the rice and chili's phenomenal. So maybe it is. Richie Bales mentions the Fritos and chili's really good. Yeah, you go to like certain barbecue restaurants, they have what they call like the Frito pie. It's an example of that. I do like, I mean, like this is one of the things in life. You know, there's always these little food things that sort of get you in trouble. One of my big ones is to get some good chili, dump a bunch of shredded cheese in there, and then just start scooping it out with chips. Like that's probably 10,000 calories. I mean, there's just no end to the damage, you know, you're doing to yourself by doing that. But there is nothing better than getting, and like Henry said, especially if it's kind of got a little heat to it, a little kick to it, put the cheese in there, dip the chip in there. I love that. I love that. Dr. Gonzo also shouting out the crab cakes and shrimp and grits. Tell you, some of the best shrimp and grits you've ever had are going to be in Charleston. Really, really good stuff. Really good stuff. And like I said, everything from like the fancy restaurants to like the places that just sort of put butcher paper down on the table. Like you got all of that. And, you know, I sort of think of myself as a man of versatility. I can eat standing up, or I can have like the white tablecloth fine dining. And in Charleston, you sort of got the whole thing going on, but it's all good. G. Grace, yeah, the Frito scoops and the chili, phenomenal. Yeah. I do like those big, and like, you know, Frito, if you ever notice this, like if you, let me not say this, but like if you like light a match to it, like it doesn't burn, it just sort of glows. Like that gives you an idea of what you're eating. They do taste good. God, they taste good. They do taste good. Henry also shutting out the crawfish etouffee. I'm just telling you, New Orleans style food is so good. I mean, it's so good. That's one of the reasons why I hope the bowls don't go away. This is so self-serving and sort of media elitish. I really hope the bowls don't go away because, man, you go to New Orleans for one of these sugar bowls, you eat so good. Ooh, boy, do you eat good. Cody was not the one. No, listen. Cody was not the one that tried to put cheese in his gumbo. Cody would never do that. All right, now I'm hungry for sure. All right, let's do a couple more. We're getting ready to go. Let me go back to Facebook for a second. Let's see how people are doing over there. We'll get ready to wrap it for today. Of course, Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. A little recruiting talk tonight. A lot going on there. New details, I'm sure, on Jared Curtis. Jerry Popham checking in. Good to see him. Dark Brooks laughing about the Fritos comment. Listen, I like all that stuff. I mean, I am not a sophisticated person when it comes to my palate. You know, I like pretty basic foods, including mass market chips and whatnot. But if you really sort of investigate, Pete Williams says he's getting hungry. I am too. Philip Jordan Wells says he's diverted the comment section on 3 different platforms. Yeah, listen, we did a lot of football. Like my thing about this is I love talking football as much as anybody. I know sometimes people get mad if we don't talk football during the comments. In defense, though, we've been on the air now for an hour and a half. Like you sort of feel like at a certain point in time, you can kind of let your hair down a little bit. Hopefully that's okay. Because I feel like we more than took care of business as far as Georgia spring football goes. Yeah, so BK knows what I'm talking about. Like if you ever had to, like, if you were out in the middle of nowhere and you, on the verge of freezing, you could light a bag of Fritos on fire. That thing's going to burn forever. That thing is going to burn forever. Let us see what else. Bill Camacho checking out. Somebody asked about who's going to burn Fritos. I guess when I was younger, I didn't do this. Like, I've never been a very adventurous person. But when I was younger, people were always just trying to see what would burn. Which you definitely should not do for young kids listening. You should definitely not do that. But they're always just sort of, putting a lighter to stuff. I don't know. People do weird things. Yeah, Eugene Marine says it's fun. We can talk about life stuff and have fun. I agree with that, Marine. I do. All right, anything else before we go? Because it is getting late. Jonathan Aaron says, if you would rather have a quarterback that throws for 300 a game or a running back that goes for 200 a game. Well, if you were going to base this solely on like the statistical outcomes, remember, NFL teams that rush 40 times or more win like 80% of the time, which is a slightly misleading stat because if you just ran the ball 40 times, that doesn't guarantee you win. If anything, it may guarantee a loss. But it is true that winning teams typically run. So if you told me that Georgia had a very high rushing total this year or an individual player had a very high rushing total per game, there's a lot more certainty that comes with wins as opposed to the quarterback who throws for a lot of yards. It's been a little while since we've had like the swaggy number one overall pick quarterback leading a team to a championship. That hasn't been the case in college football in quite some time. B, sometimes a lot of passing yards suggest pretty big deficit. I mean, honestly, and as much as it pains me to admit, the thing that prevented Carson's numbers from looking even worse this past year than they were was the fact that against, sort of softer coverage late in games that Georgia was trailing, he's just throwing the ball every time. And that's sort of padding his stats. Oftentimes the good rushing total tells me something pretty positive about your likelihood of having won the game. The good passing total does not necessarily tell me the same thing. If anything, it suggests the opposite. Let us see what else. Anything else before we go? All right, good stuff here today, y'all. Fun times. Thanks for being here. Do me a favor. Check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Last night was, to me, the first night. I don't know if you noticed this. We're like, it was a little breezy, but it wasn't quite cold. I was still walking around, kind of late last night. Not cold, sort of start to feel like a little bit of a spring night. Now, if it's starting to get a little bit more sort of temperate at night, that means the daytime temperature is about to be pretty warm. In fact, this weekend, I believe that's going to be the case. That means that air conditioner at the end of last season that you sort of try to forget about, well, now it's back top of mind again. And if you're worried that you need a new unit because somebody has told you you need a new unit, eventually you probably will. You're going to get there, right? Everybody does. But our friends at R.S. Andrews may be able to tell you how to get some new life out of your old unit. You can get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs, and it may only cost you $99. So check them out online, R.S. Andrews, for more on that. That is rsandrews.com for more on that. The RS stands for rapid service. That means they're standing by, ready to serve you right now, story after story. They've been delivering smiles, and they can deliver one for you as well when you find them online at rsandrews.com. All right, have a great day, everybody. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will talk to you then.